The call came through at exactly 3:22 in the morning, Dallas time, while I was shoulder deep in cold server racks, trying to isolate a ransomware attack that had completely locked down Lone Star Trust's entire regional network. My cell phone buzzed violently against my belt clip. I ignored it at first, focusing my eyes on the diagnostic terminal. Then it buzzed again, and then a third time. I pulled off my heavy work gloves and checked the screen. Donald Briggs, my direct supervisor at Sentinel Tech, was calling from headquarters in Chicago. It was normal business hours for him, but in my time zone, the world was pitch black and silent. I almost did not answer the call. When you are managing a major cybersecurity crisis that is costing a financial institution approximately $180,000 per hour in lost banking operations, corporate phone calls feel far less urgent than the red warning alerts flashing across every monitor in the data center. But I answered anyway, because that is what 22 years of being the guy who fixes the unfixable teaches you to do. Old habits from my service in the United States Air Force die hard. "Ronald Vance speaking," I said, keeping my voice low. "Ronald, it is Donald," Briggs replied. "I need to inform you of a company decision. Effective immediately, we no longer require your services as senior cybersecurity architect. Your employment is terminated as of today." I looked at the monitoring station in front of me. The ransomware signature 0x7F3A was still propagating through the backup databases. The encryption of the core database was 73% complete. The entire banking system was completely offline, along with the ATM network and the online customer portal. Stephen Miller, the bank's IT director, was standing 10 feet away, staring at me like I was his last hope. And I was, because I was literally the only person who understood their custom security framework well enough to reverse engineer a solution this complex. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I will inform the bank director that you will be handling the recovery procedures for the crisis I am currently managing." There was a long silence on the line. "What crisis?" Briggs asked. "The ransomware attack that brought me to Dallas yesterday," I replied. "The entire banking network is encrypted. The attack is costing approximately $180,000 per hour in lost operations. I am in the middle of reverse engineering the encryption key derivation algorithm. I assume you will want to send another engineer to complete the recovery, since I no longer work for Sentinel Tech." More silence followed. I could hear Briggs breathing heavily. "Ronald, let us discuss this after you have resolved the bank's situation," he said. "I do not think that is appropriate," I answered. "You just terminated my employment. I should not be working on Sentinel Tech projects if I am no longer an employee. I will brief Stephen on what I have discovered so far and catch the next flight back home. Back to my wife Susan Vance and the retirement planning I should probably focus on now." "Wait, Ronald, let me call you back," Briggs said and ended the call. "My name is Ronald Vance. I am 54 years old, and I just got terminated while managing a cybersecurity crisis that nobody else at my company knows how to solve. Before I explain what happened over the next 72 hours, let me establish who I am and why that phone call was the most expensive mistake Donald Briggs ever made in his career. I joined Sentinel Tech in 2004 as a cybersecurity engineer specializing in financial institution network security. Before that, I had spent 8 years in the Air Force working on communication systems security at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. These military skills translated perfectly to civilian cybersecurity work, where bank failures could wipe out people's life savings. My role was responding to complex security incidents that standard protocols could not handle. When a bank got hit with malware and their IT department could not crack it, they called Sentinel Tech, and Sentinel Tech sent me. In my career, I had responded to 287 emergencies across 11 states. I had recovered encrypted databases, rebuilt compromised authentication systems, and eliminated attack vectors that could paralyze multi-billion-dollar financial institutions. Most importantly, I had developed deep institutional knowledge about the specific security framework Sentinel Tech had designed and implemented. Every client had unique requirements and custom modifications. Every system had vulnerabilities and edge cases that existed only in my experience-based understanding of how those networks behaved under attack. After 30 years of marriage, My wife Susan Vance knew me better than anyone. Our adult children joked that I could fix complex databases, but not a simple television remote. They were not wrong, but they understood that what I did mattered. That knowledge was what made me valuable, and that knowledge was also what Donald Briggs had just eliminated from Sentinel Tech's available expertise at the worst possible moment. The crisis at Lone Star Trust had started 38 hours earlier. Lone Star Trust, one of Sentinel Tech's largest clients, had called our emergency hotline at 9:15 on Thursday night, reporting that their entire network had been compromised by ransomware. They operated 47 branch locations across the state and processed approximately $180,000 per hour in transaction volume. Complete network lockdown meant they could not process transactions, access customer accounts, or operate ATMs. After 4 hours of remote analysis examining network logs, I determined this could not be resolved remotely. I booked a flight to Dallas departing Friday morning at 7 o'clock, arrived at 9:30, and went directly to the bank's data center facility. Stephen Miller met me at the security checkpoint. He looked like he had not slept in 30 hours. "Mr. Vance, thank God you are here," he said. "We have been completely offline for 36 hours. Our customers cannot access accounts. We cannot process payments. And corporate is demanding answers we do not have." "I need direct access to your primary servers and network monitoring systems," I replied. This attack signature matches a ransomware family I have seen before, but the encryption implementation is much more sophisticated. The air in the server facility was chilled, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. The constant, high-pitched hum of thousands of spinning drives felt like a physical pressure against my temples. Stephen's eyes were bloodshot, and he kept running his hand through his gray hair as we walked. He led me to the data center. Rows of server racks lined the facility, most displaying red fault indicators. Multiple monitoring stations showed encrypted file systems, corrupted databases, and the distinctive signature of the ransomware. All silent, all locked, all costing the bank $180,000 per hour. I spent the next 8 hours analyzing the attack vector, reverse engineering the encryption algorithm, and tracing the ransomware's propagation pattern through the network. The methodical approach reminded me of troubleshooting communication arrays in the Air Force. Except instead of keeping pilots connected to ground control, I was trying to keep families connected to their bank accounts. Same principle, higher stakes. By 6 o'clock Friday evening, I had identified the vulnerability that allowed initial access and isolated the algorithm the ransomware was using to generate encryption keys. The attack had exploited a zero-day vulnerability in the custom customer authentication system that Sentinel Tech had designed and implemented 3 years ago. It was elegant, sophisticated, and exactly the kind of attack that required someone who understood both the original system design and current threat landscape. Here's what the attackers had identified: a buffer overflow vulnerability in the authentication module and used it to gain administrative access to the domain controllers. From there, they deployed the ransomware configured with a custom key derivation function that made standard decryption tools completely useless. The ransomware was specifically engineered to target financial institutions using Sentinel Tech's authentication framework. The vulnerability was in custom code that Sentinel Tech had written specifically for Lone Star Trust's installation. That code existed in only 4 other banks. I had been part of the team that designed and implemented it, meaning I was one of only 2 people in the entire world who understood how the authentication handshake worked at the assembly language level. Fixing it required reverse engineering the key derivation function, exploiting a timing vulnerability in the ransomware's encryption routine, recovering the master decryption keys from residual memory, and then systematically decrypting and restoring 847 gigabytes of database files across 23 server clusters. I estimated 16 to 20 hours of work. I started at 7 o'clock Friday night. There is something satisfying about taking apart a complex problem piece by piece, understanding how each component works, and then rebuilding it better than it was before. My wife Susan Vance used to say, I approached broken networks like a mechanic approaches a classic car engine, with patience, respect, and an absolute refusal to give up until it runs perfectly. By 3 o'clock Saturday morning, I had successfully reverse-engineered the key derivation algorithm and was in the process of extracting encryption keys from memory dumps when Donald Briggs called and told me I was fired. After Donald Briggs hung up, Stephen Miller approached me cautiously. "Ronald, you look concerned," he said. "Is everything okay? I just got terminated by my employer while in the middle of recovering your banking systems," I replied. His expression went from tired to absolute panic. "Terminated? But you are the only person who understands our security framework. What happens to our systems?" "That is an excellent question," I said. "Sentinel Tech will need to send someone else to complete the recovery. How long will that take?" "The only other engineer who understands your authentication system is Mason Turner," I explained. "Mason is currently in Colorado managing a credit union breach. Sentinel Tech might have to wait until he becomes available." "How long?" Stephen asked, his voice trembling. "Mason's engagement in Colorado is scheduled for another 10 days, I replied. "After that, he would need time to review your system documentation and understand the attack pattern." "It could be 2 weeks total." Stephen's face went completely white. "We cannot wait 2 weeks. Every day offline costs us $4,300,000 in lost operations. 2 weeks would be over $60 million in losses, plus regulatory penalties, plus customer exodus." "Then I suggest you contact Sentinel Tech Corporate and explain the urgency," I said. At 4:47 in the morning, my phone rang again. This time it was Gerald Foley, Sentinel Tech's Chief Technology Officer. Gerald had been with the company for 18 years and understood exactly how critical my role was. "Ronald, I just got off the phone with Donald," he said. "There has been a misunderstanding about your employment status. We need you to complete the Lone Star Trust engagement before we discuss any personnel." "Gerald," I replied. "Donald was very clear. He said my employment was terminated effective immediately. That is not a misunderstanding. That is termination." "I understand this is confusing, but let us focus on resolving the bank's crisis first," Gerald said. "We can address your employment situation after you have restored their banking operations." "I do not think that is appropriate," I answered. "If I am terminated, I should not be working on Sentinel Tech projects. If I am not terminated, then Donald needs to call me back and clarify that he made an error. This is a critical client situation, Ronald. Lone Star Trust is one of our largest accounts. They are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour. We need you to complete the recovery work. Then you need to clarify my employment status first," I said. "Am I a Sentinel Tech employee or not?" There was a long pause. I could hear Gerald thinking through the consequences of the situation. If he said I was still employed, he would be contradicting Donald's termination and creating internal political problems. If he said I was terminated, he would be admitting that Sentinel Tech had just eliminated their crisis response capability in the middle of their most expensive emergency. The Air Force had taught me that in crisis situations, clear communication and a defined chain of command matter more than anything else. Right now, Sentinel Tech's chain of command was giving me contradictory orders. "Ronald, let me conference in Donald so we can resolve this together," Gerald suggested. "I would rather you did not," I replied. "Donald was clear about his decision. I am respecting that decision by no longer working on Sentinel Tech projects. If the bank needs assistance, they should contact Sentinel Tech's emergency response line and request another engineer." "There is no other engineer available who understands their custom authentication system," Gerald admitted. "That is an unfortunate situation, but it is not my problem anymore since I am no longer a Sentinel Tech employee." I ended the call. Stephen Miller was standing nearby, having heard my side of the conversation. "What should we do, Ronald?" he asked. "You should contact Sentinel Tech and request emergency cybersecurity support," I said. "Explain the urgency of the situation. They will prioritize getting someone here as quickly as possible." "But you are here now," Stephen said. "You understand our systems. You were in the middle of recovering our data. Can you not just complete the work?" "I was fired 50 minutes ago," I replied. "I cannot ethically continue working on a project for a company that just terminated my employment." "What if we hired you directly?" Stephen asked. Not through Sentinel Tech, but as an independent consultant working for Lone Star Trust. I thought about that carefully. In the Air Force, we had strict protocols about proper authorization. This situation felt similar. I needed clear authority before proceeding. That would create contractual complications, I said. Lone Star Trust has a cybersecurity service agreement with Sentinel Tech. That agreement probably has exclusivity provisions preventing you from hiring outside consultants to work on Sentinel Tech design systems. I will check our contract, Stephen said. He pulled out his phone and called the bank's legal department. After a rapid conversation, he hung up and looked at me with cautious optimism. Our legal team says the service agreement has exclusivity provisions for routine maintenance, but emergency incident response can be conducted by any qualified consultant if Sentinel Tech cannot provide timely support. They are defining timely support as within 24 hours of request. Has the bank formally requested emergency support from Sentinel Tech? I asked. I will do that right now, Stephen replied. He sent an email to Sentinel Tech's emergency response team, with me copied, formally requesting immediate incident response for the ransomware attack and noting that the previous engineer, me, was no longer available. He marked it urgent and requested a response within 4 hours. At 7:23 in the morning, we received a response from Sentinel Tech's incident coordinator. We acknowledge your request for emergency cybersecurity support. The email read, our senior incident response engineers are currently committed to other client emergencies. We are working to identify available resources and will provide an estimated response timeline within 12 hours. 12 hours meant the bank would be offline for at least another half day, probably longer. That meant another $2,200,000 in lost operations at minimum. Stephen showed me the email. What does this mean? He asked. It means Sentinel Tech does not have anyone available to send, I explained. Mason is in Colorado. Amanda Richardson is on medical leave, recovering from surgery, and apparently, nobody else at Sentinel Tech has the expertise to handle this ransomware variant. So we wait, Stephen asked. Unless you want to exercise your contract provision and hire an independent consultant, I replied. Are you available as an independent consultant? Stephen asked. I could be, I said. What would your rate structure be? I thought about that carefully. Independent rates for emergency incident response typically range from $400 to $900 per hour, depending on expertise level and urgency. I was at the top of the expertise scale, and this was definitely urgent. More importantly, I had a mortgage to finish paying off, and retirement plans that had just been disrupted. $800 per hour for emergency incident response, with a minimum 30-hour engagement to ensure complete recovery and system hardening, I said. That is $24,000 total. Payment terms are 50% deposit before I resume work, and the remaining 50% upon successful system restoration. Stephen did not hesitate. Done, he said. I will have our finance department process the deposit immediately. At 9:15 on Saturday morning, $12,000 cleared into my business bank account. I had opened that account years ago for occasional freelance work, never thinking I would need it for full-time consulting. At 9:30, I resumed work on the bank's ransomware recovery. The work felt different now. Instead of being an employee following company protocols, I was an independent contractor with direct accountability to the client. The Air Force had taught me the importance of mission focus, and now my mission was crystal clear: restore Lone Star Trust's banking operations as quickly and completely as possible. By 6 o'clock Saturday afternoon, I had successfully extracted all encryption keys and was beginning systematic database decryption. The process reminded me of defusing ordnance: methodical, careful, with no room for shortcuts or mistakes. Each decrypted database cluster brought more of the bank's operations back online. By 11 o'clock Saturday night, the core banking systems were operational with no data loss. By 1 o'clock Sunday morning, all branch networks were restored. Total downtime was 52 hours. Total operational loss was approximately $9,400,000. But the systems were running again, and the security patches I had implemented would prevent reoccurrence of the authentication vulnerability. Stephen was watching the monitoring stations. with visible relief as transaction processing resumed across all 47 branches. "Ronald, I cannot thank you enough," he said. "You saved us from a disaster that would have been catastrophically worse if we had waited for Sentinel Tech." "You are welcome," I replied. "I will prepare a technical report documenting the attack vector, recovery procedures, and security recommendations. You should share that with Sentinel Tech so they can update their other clients." "Will you be available if we have questions?" Stephen asked. "Yes, my consulting arrangement includes 30 days of follow-up support for any issues related to this incident." At 2:34 on Sunday night, I received a call from Gerald Foley. I was back at my hotel, exhausted but satisfied. More importantly, I was starting to realize that this unexpected career transition might not be the disaster I had initially thought. "Ronald, I understand you completed the recovery as an independent consultant," Gerald said. "We need to discuss your employment status." "Gerald Donald's decision to terminate me was clear," I replied. "I am now operating as an independent consultant. It is more lucrative, and I have better control over which projects I accept." "What does that mean for Sentinel Tech?" Gerald asked. "You are our most experienced incident response engineer. It means Sentinel Tech will need to develop other engineers with similar expertise or accept that your incident response capability is significantly reduced," I said. "That is not acceptable," Gerald replied. "We have ongoing client emergencies that require your specific knowledge." And Sentinel Tech should have considered that before terminating me while I was literally in the middle of managing one of those emergencies. The conversation was becoming familiar. In the military, we had a saying, "Poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part." Sentinel Tech was discovering that lesson the expensive way. "Ronald, I understand you are upset about how Donald handled the situation," Gerald said. "I am not upset, Gerald," I answered. "I am simply making rational business decisions based on new information. Donald demonstrated that Sentinel Tech does not value my contributions enough to avoid terminating me during a crisis. I have learned from that demonstration." "What would it take to bring you back to Sentinel Tech?" Gerald asked. "I am not interested in coming back," I replied. "But I am willing to discuss limited consulting arrangements for specific emergencies where my expertise is genuinely necessary." "What would those arrangements look like?" Gerald asked. "Sentinel Tech can retain me as an emergency incident consultant," I replied. $800 per hour for active incident response, a $5,000 monthly retainer for availability and consultation, and a 6-month contract renewable at my discretion. I work remotely unless travel is absolutely necessary, and travel time is billed at the active incident rate. There was a long silence while Gerald processed the numbers. My previous salary as senior cybersecurity architect had been $108,000 annually. I was now proposing a consulting arrangement that would cost Sentinel Tech approximately $60,000 annually, just for the retainer, plus potentially hundreds of thousands more if they actually needed me for active incident response work. "That is significantly more expensive than your previous compensation," Gerald noted. "That is correct," I replied. "But it is far less expensive than what happened at Lone Star Trust when you did not have me available. They lost $9,400,000 during 52 hours of downtime. They would have lost over $60 million if they had waited 2 weeks for Mason." "I need to discuss this with executive leadership," Gerald said. "Take your time," I replied. "I am not going anywhere." While Gerald Foley discussed my proposal with executive leadership, I contacted my attorney to address another critical issue: my unpaid quarterly commission. Donald Briggs had attempted to withhold my $420,000 bonus, claiming my termination for cause invalidated the payment. My legal counsel informed me that by withholding my earned quarterly commission, Sentinel Tech was in direct violation of the state labor laws, and by firing their only critical incident responder during a live multi-million-dollar emergency, Donald Briggs had committed a gross breach of fiduciary duty to both the company's shareholders and its contracted clients. We sent a formal demand letter outlining these points, noting that if the commission was not paid immediately, we would file a lawsuit alleging both labor law violations and breach of fiduciary duty. The threat of public litigation during a major client crisis was more than Sentinel Tech could handle. Over the next 4 weeks, my phone did not stop ringing. I received 9 emergency calls from former Sentinel Tech clients experiencing cybersecurity incidents. Each call followed the exact same pattern: critical system compromise. Sentinel Tech could not send an engineer quickly enough, and they wanted to know if I could help as an independent consultant. I helped all 9 clients. Total consulting revenue for those 4 weeks was $127,000. The work reminded me why I had enjoyed this field for so long. Instead of dealing with corporate politics and budget meetings, I was focused purely on solving problems for clients who genuinely appreciated my expertise. Each successful recovery built my reputation and led to more referrals. Word spreads fast in the cybersecurity industry. By June, I was receiving calls from banks that had never worked with Sentinel Tech asking if I was available for incident response and ongoing security consulting. By August, I had 6 long-term consulting contracts with financial institutions who wanted guaranteed access to my expertise. Combined retainer revenue was $38,000 monthly, which is approximately $456,000 annually, plus additional project fees. In September, Sentinel Tech formally offered me the consulting arrangement I had proposed to Gerald. $800 per hour active work, $5,000 monthly retainer, and a 6-month renewable contract. I accepted because it was guaranteed revenue and Sentinel Tech represented a reliable source of incident response work. Donald Briggs lasted until November. The board of directors terminated him after they calculated that his decision to fire me during the Lone Star Trust crisis had cost Sentinel Tech approximately $1,700,000 in lost client confidence, incident response costs, and consulting fees. They were now paying me instead of employing me directly. The $1,700,000 breakdown was clear. Lone Star Trust had reduced their annual service contract with Sentinel Tech by $340,000, citing concerns about response capability. 2 other major clients had similarly reduced their contracts after hearing about the Lone Star Trust situation. Sentinel Tech had paid premium rates to reassign Mason from Colorado to cover incidents I would have handled, incurring approximately $87,000 in expedited travel and overtime costs, and they were now paying me $60,000 annually in retainer fees, plus incident rates that were 35% higher than my previous compensation. All because Donald had decided to fire me at 3:22 in the morning while I was literally recovering a bank from a ransomware crisis. Gerald called me in December. "Ronald, I want you to know that Sentinel Tech has restructured our incident response management," he said. "Donald is no longer with the company. We have learned from this situation." "What have you learned?" I asked. "That institutional knowledge has value that is not captured in salary comparisons," Gerald replied. "That incident capability requires deep expertise that cannot be quickly replaced. That decisions about personnel should consider operational impact, not just budget line items." "Those are good lessons," I said. "We would like to discuss bringing you back as a full-time employee," Gerald suggested. "We are prepared to offer significantly improved compensation and a formal role as Director of Cybersecurity Incident Response." "I appreciate that, Gerald," I replied. "But I am earning more as an independent consultant than I ever did as a Sentinel Tech employee. And I have a much better work-life balance because I choose which projects to accept." "But you built your career at Sentinel Tech," Gerald said. "We value your contributions and we want to make this right." "Gerald, you can make this right by continuing our consulting arrangement and by valuing your remaining engineers appropriately," I said. "Do not repeat with someone else what Donald did to me." "We have learned from this $1,700,000 lesson," Gerald admitted. I stayed independent. By late 2026, I was managing 11 long-term consulting relationships across 8 states, earning nearly 5 times my previous salary. More importantly, I was valued. When clients called me for incident response, they understood they were paying premium rates for premium expertise. Nobody called me too expensive, and nobody questioned whether my approach was worth the investment. They had all seen what happened when they tried to solve cybersecurity crises without specialized knowledge. The financial security meant Susan Vance and I could finally plan that retirement we had been talking about for years. Our children were proud, and my son said I had become a legend in cybersecurity circles. "You are your own boss now," Susan told me. "Sometimes the best revenge is not proving people wrong. It is letting them experience the full cost of being right about what they wanted."